In the shadowed recesses of existence, where the veil between being and nothingness thins to a whisper, we confront the inexorable pull of the void that resides not in distant stars, but in the marrow of our own structures. Consider the architecture of human endeavor, those grand edifices we erect to ward off the chaos, only to find that they become labyrinths devouring their creators. In the annals of forgotten epics, there lies a chronicle of a colossal mechanism, a vast industrial forge buried beneath the Earth's crust, where men delved into the planet's heart seeking dominion over matter, unaware that the true extraction was of their essence. This forge, conceived in the fevered ambitions of progress, sprawled like veins through rock, chambers echoing with the ceaseless rhythm of hammers and gears, a symphony that masked the silent erosion of souls. Workers descended daily into its maw, their lanterns flickering like futile prayers against the encompassing dark, each shift a step deeper into an oblivion that promised purpose yet delivered only the weight of perpetual descent. The overseers, clad in the authority of invention, proclaimed this underworld as a bastion of human triumph, a realm where raw or yielded to will, forging tools that would reshape the surface world. Yet beneath the clamor, a subtler machinery operated, one that ground not stone but the fragile constructs of identity. Men entered as individuals, burdened with dreams of legacy, only to emerge, if they emerged, as hollowed vessels, their thoughts synchronized to the forge's pulse, their memories sifted like slag from molten metal. The air grew thick with particulates that invaded lungs and minds alike, inducing visions of infinite replication, where each worker saw himself mirrored in the next, an endless chain of duplicates bound in futile labor. This was no mere toil. It was a ritual of dissolution, where the self dissolved into the collective mechanism, each cog realizing its insignificance yet compelled to turn eternally. As the forge expanded, devouring more earth, it birthed anomalies in the human fabric. Whispers circulated among the laborers of chambers where the rock wept a viscous fluid, seeping into pores and altering perceptions, transforming robust frames into spectral forms that moved with mechanical precision but harbored inner tempests of doubt. One might ponder the philosophical undercurrent. If existence is defined by striving against entropy, what becomes of beings trapped in a system that accelerates decay? The overseers, perched in elevated observatories, monitored this transformation with detached curiosity, noting how isolation bred a peculiar madness, a dread that manifested not in screams, but in the quiet acceptance of erasure. Workers began to question the boundaries of their flesh, feeling the forge's vibrations resonate within their bones, blurring the line between man and machine, organic and inert. Deeper still, in the uncharted strata, the forge uncovered voids that defied mapping, pockets of absolute nothingness where light perished and time dilated into stagnation. Those assigned to probe these abysses returned altered, their eyes reflecting an emptiness that infected others through mere proximity. The psychological pressure mounted insidiously, a slow compression of the psyche, where doubts about one's autonomy festered like untreated wounds. Was the labor voluntary? Or had the forge imprinted its imperatives so deeply that free will became an illusion? The overseers documented these shifts in ledgers of cold calculation, viewing the human element as expendable fuel, yet failing to grasp how the system they governed mirrored their own entrapment in hierarchies of control. Existence, in this subterranean domain, revealed itself as a cascade of dependencies, each level sustaining the next through mutual exploitation, a spiral where ascent promised only further entanglement. The dread intensified as anomalies proliferated. Workers reported sensations of being observed by the rock itself, as if the earth harbored a sentience resentful of intrusion, responding with subtle manipulations that eroded sanity. Sleep, when it came, brought dreams of infinite descent, ladders crumbling into bottomless shafts, symbolizing the futility of resistance against gravitational inevitability. Philosophically, this evoked the terror of contingency. Every action, every breath, contingent upon the forge's continuance, yet the forge itself a fragile construct teetering on collapse. The emotional weight pressed relentlessly, a cumulative burden where joy atrophied, replaced by a numb resignation to the cycle. Men who once harbored aspirations for family or freedom found their desires calcified, hardened into mere echoes, the psychological vice tightening until individuality fractured into shards of compliance. In the core chambers, where heat warped reality, the true horror unfolded in the form of transmutations. Exposure to the forge's emissions induced mutations not of body alone, but of essence. Workers perceiving their lives as scripted repetitions, each day a rehearsal for an unattainable finale. The tonal atmosphere thickened with oppression, the air laden with the scent of scorched ambition, fostering a dread that seeped into every interaction. Conversations devolved into rote affirmations of productivity, masking the underlying terror of obsolescence. One could contemplate the existential implications. If meaning derives from creation, what horror arises when creation serves only to perpetuate its own meaningless grind? The overseers, insulated yet not immune, began to exhibit similar fractures, their directives growing erratic, hinting at a contagion of despair that respected no rank. As the spiral deepened, the forge's logic inverted. What began as extraction of resources evolved into an inversion where the human became the mind commodity, psyche stripped layer by layer, revealing cores of primal void. Workers vanished into the depths not through accident, but through a deliberate culling, their absences rationalized as necessary sacrifices to efficiency, yet the voids they left amplified the collective unease. The psychological pressure manifested in hallucinations of alternate selves, paths not taken haunting the corridors like specters, underscoring the dread of unlived potential. Emotionally, this bred a profound isolation, each individual an island in a sea of synchronized motion, aware of the abyss yawning between connections that proved illusory. The atmosphere congealed into a palpable heaviness, breaths labored under the weight of unspoken realizations. Philosophically, the forge embodied the absurdity of pursuit, a monument to the human delusion of mastery over chaos, only to reveal that chaos resided within. The slow buildup of ideas spiraled, from the illusion of progress to the revelation of stagnation, from communal bonds to atomized despair, each turn tightening the noose of existential entrapment. Dread accumulated like sediment, layering upon itself, evolving from mere fear of physical peril to the terror of ontological insignificance. Workers pondered, in rare moments of lucidity, the forge's resemblance to the cosmos itself, a vast, indifferent machine grinding stars into dust, indifferent to the fleeting sparks of consciousness it extinguished. The oppression deepened as the system internalized its flaws, overseers enforcing rituals of surveillance that mirrored the worker's subjugation, creating a fractal of control where every level replicated the tyranny above. Emotional weight compounded, grief for lost autonomy manifesting as a chronic ache, a psychological bruise that never healed. The tonal shift toward inexorable doom intensified, the forge's hum a dirge for forgotten identities. Ideas evolved in spirals, the pursuit of depth leading only to greater darkness, the quest for value yielding only depletion, each revelation peeling back layers to expose further voids. In the nadir, where pressures warped diamond from carbon, the human element transfigured into something beyond recognition, psyches compressed into singular points of endurance without purpose. The dread, now omnipresent, whispered of the ultimate horror, that existence itself was this forge, a universal mechanism indifferent to suffering, perpetuating cycles of creation and destruction without end or meaning. The atmosphere, saturated with the essence of futility, left no space for respite, each breath a concession to continuance. Yet the spiral persisted, ideas twisting inward, from the facade of utility to the core of vanity, from the pretense of solidarity to the truth of solitude, evolving without resolution, deepening the abyss. Emotional burdens amassed, unspoken laments echoing in the chambers, psychological fissures widening into chasms. The oppressive tone enveloped all, a shroud of inevitability, where dread evolved from external threat to intrinsic condition. Philosophically, this descent illuminated the void at humanity's center, the forge a metaphor for the self-devouring nature of ambition, where every advance deepened the entrapment. The weight pressed eternally, unresolved, heavy with the accumulation of unacknowledged horrors, spiraling ever downward into the uncharted dark. In the dim corridors of being, where light is not absent but merely refused, there emerges another descent, not through stone or steel, but through the slow unraveling of certainty itself. Imagine a city that never quite awakens, its streets laid out in perfect geometric obedience, every building aligned to an axis no one remembers drawing. The inhabitants move through these avenues with the measured courtesy of people who have long since forgotten why they nod in greeting. They are not prisoners in the usual sense. No bars confine them. No guards patrol the intersections. The confinement is subtler, woven into the very grammar of daily life. The same hour for rising, the same cadence of footsteps, the same phrases exchanged at the same corners, repeated until meaning has leached out of them entirely. At first the repetition feels like rhythm, a comforting pulse against the silence that presses from all sides. But rhythm, when unbroken, becomes arrhythmia of the soul. Each morning the same curtain is drawn aside to reveal the same gray square of sky. Each evening the same lamp is lit to cast the same shadow across the same wall. The inhabitants do not complain. Complaint would require contrast, and contrast has been methodically erased. They have been taught, gently, persistently, that variation is disturbance, that deviation is the first symptom of fracture. So they continue, polishing the surface of routine until it reflects nothing back but its own blank perfection. Beneath this polished surface, however, something uncoils. Not violently, not with noise. It is the slow loosening of the knot that once tied I to here and now. A man stands at his window and notices, for the first time in years, that the street outside has no depth. The buildings opposite are flat, like stage scenery. The people passing below are silhouettes cut from the same gray paper. He blinks, expecting the illusion to correct itself. It is not. The realization arrives without fanfare. The city has always been this thin. He has simply stopped seeing the thinness because seeing it would demand acknowledgement that he, too, is drawn in the same economical strokes. He does not scream. He closes the curtain with the same deliberate motion he has used every day for decades. The gesture is identical, yet something in the musculature has changed. There's a hesitation, a microsecond of resistance, as though the arm remembers a time when closing a curtain meant something other than continuation. That hesitation is the first crack. It spreads quietly. By evening, he finds himself counting the repetitions in his own sentences. Good evening. Good evening. The weather remains steady. The weather remains steady. Each echo returns heavier than the last, until the words feel like stones dropped into a well that has no bottom. Others begin to notice similar distortions, though none speak of them directly. Conversation has become a ceremony of avoidance. To name the weight is to invite it fully into the room. Instead, they develop new rituals of distraction, polishing already spotless door handles, refolding linens into ever tighter squares, tracing the grain of wooden tables with fingertips until the whirls blur into fingerprints that are no longer recognizably their own. These actions are performed with reverence, as though repetition itself, might become a form of prayer if only it is repeated with sufficient devotion. Yet devotion, when directed toward nothing, curdles. The city's inhabitants grow thinner, not in body, but in presence. They occupy space, yet their occupation feels borrowed. A woman sits at her table and realizes she can no longer remember whether the cup in front of her is hers or whether it has simply always been there, waiting for someone to lift it. She lifts it anyway. The porcelain is cool against her palm, but the coolness does not belong to her. It belongs to the cup, which has no need of warmth. She sets it down. The sound of porcelain meeting wood is the only proof, for an instant, that she exists. Time, in this place, does not progress, it accumulates. Each day is not added to the last, but pressed against it, layer upon layer, until the stack becomes so dense that no single day can be distinguished from any other. The inhabitants feel this density in their chests, a pressure that is not pain, but the absence of space where pain might once have lived. They breathe shallowly, as though deeper inhalation might disturb the equilibrium of suffocation. Sleep offers no reprieve. Dreams are only slightly rearranged versions of waking. The same rooms, the same faces, the same phrases spoken in the same order. Only now the speaker's mouth moves a fraction too slowly, revealing the machinery beneath the skin. One night a child, there are still children, though fewer each year, stand in the middle of an empty boulevard and asks, very quietly, why do we keep walking the same way? The question is so small it barely disturbs the air. It hangs there, unanswered, because no adult can remember a time when there was another way to walk. The child waits. No one arrives to explain. Eventually the child resumes walking, but the rhythm of the steps has been altered by a single, imperceptible hitch. That hitch is enough. Somewhere in the architecture of the city, a corresponding fracture appears. A hairline crack in a cornerstone no one has looked at in generations. The crack does not widen dramatically. It merely exists. An existence, once noticed, refuses to be unnoticed again. People begin to pause for fractions of seconds, longer than protocol allows. They look at one another, and, for the briefest moment, see not the familiar mask, but the stranger wearing it. The stranger is tired. The stranger is afraid. The stranger has been pretending so long that the pretense has eaten the original face. Recognition brings no relief, only a deeper fatigue. To see the stranger in another is to see the stranger in oneself, and that sight cannot be unseen. Still, no rebellion follows. There is no uprising, no dramatic exodus. The city is too efficient for drama. Instead, the unraveling continues in miniature. A hand that trembles when reaching for a door, a voice that cracks on a word it has spoken 10,000 times, a gaze that lingers on a horizon where no horizon should be. Each tremor is a confession the speaker never voices aloud. Each crack is a prayer that has forgotten its object. Philosophically, the city embodies the terror of perfect consistency. If everything repeats without deviation, then nothing ever truly occurs. Event becomes pattern. Pattern becomes law. Law becomes fate. Fate becomes the suffocating certainty that nothing else is possible. The inhabitants are not oppressed by external force, but by the total absence of externality. There is no outside to flee toward, no alternative against which the present might be measured. The city is all that is, was, and shall be, and it is indifferent to whether its citizens believe in it or not. The emotional tonnage is unbearable yet borne without complaint. Grief accumulates in the silences between sentences. Dread settles in the joints like damp rot. Loneliness wears the face of companionship. Hope, long ago identified as a dangerous irritant, has been surgically removed from the collective vocabulary. What remains is continuance, pure, mechanical, merciless continuance. And yet, in the marrow of that continuance, something refuses to be fully extinguished. Not hope, not resistance, merely a faint, persistent dissonance. The awareness that the system, for all its flawless symmetry, requires the constant labor of denial to remain symmetrical. Every repeated gesture is also an act of suppression. Every identical day is also a violence done to possibility. The city endures because its inhabitants spend their entire being on the task of making it seem endurable. No one knows how long this can last. No one knows whether the dissonance will one day reach a pitch that shatters the glass of routine, or whether it will simply fade, absorb back into the gray equilibrium from which it briefly emerged. The streets remain perfect. The buildings remain aligned. The footsteps continue, measured, courteous, hollow. Somewhere a curtain is drawn aside. The sky is still gray. The square is still empty. A hand hesitates, only for a heartbeat, before letting the fabric fall back into place. The hesitation is not recorded, is not remarked upon. It happened, and in happening, it insists that happening is still possible. Even here, even now, even in the city that has forgotten how to end in the veiled continuum of awareness, where perception folds upon itself like ancient parchment cracking under the touch of unseen hands, we encounter the inexhaustible weave of isolation that binds not bodies, but the fragile threads of cognition. Envision a vast library suspended in ether, its shelves extending into infinities that curve back upon their origins, volumes bound in skins of forgotten epochs, each page a testament to the solitary act of knowing. Scholars wander these halls, their footsteps muffled by the density of accumulated silence, drawn by the promise of revelation, yet ensnared in the perpetual deferral of understanding. The air hangs heavy with the scent of decaying ink, a reminder that knowledge, once inscribed, begins its slow dissolution into obscurity, leaving only the residue of questions that multiply without mercy. These scholars, cloaked in robes woven from the fabric of inquiry, approach the tomes with reverence born of desperation. Each book opens not to answers, but to labyrinthine texts that reference other volumes, creating chains of dependency that stretch across the ethereal expanse. A seeker might grasp a spine labeled with arcane symbols, only to find within it diagrams of thought structures that mirror the library's architecture. suggesting that the edifice itself is a manifestation of the mind's futile attempt to catalog chaos. As pages turn, the ink shifts subtly, rearranging into new configurations that render previous readings obsolete, forcing the scholar to retrace steps in an ever-widening circle of reinterpretation. This is no sanctuary of wisdom. It is a mechanism of perpetual postponement, where the act of seeking becomes the essence of entrapment, each inside a mirage that dissolves upon approach. Deeper into the stacks, the psychological constriction intensifies, a gradual narrowing of the mental aperture. The scholars perceive echoes of their own thoughts reverberating from distant shelves, distorted into alien dialects that mock their efforts. Isolation manifests not as solitude, but as the horrifying proximity of one's duplicated self, fragmented across countless reflections. One might pause, hand trembling over a parchment, realizing that the words inscribed are echoes of internal monologues, transcribed by some inscrutable force that anticipates every query. The dread accumulates in layers. First, the suspicion that knowledge is not discovered but imposed, then the realization that the imposer's identity is indistinguishable from the seeker's own fractured psyche. Emotionally, this breeds a profound weariness, a soul fatigue where curiosity curdles into compulsion, driving the pursuit forward even as it erodes the pursuer. The tonal shroud thickens, oppressive in its uniformity, the library's dim luminescence casting shadows that seem to absorb rather than obscure. Ideas spiral inward. From the illusion of comprehensive mastery to the exposure of infinite gaps, from the comfort of structured inquiry to the terror of boundless ambiguity. Scholars begin to sense the library's sentience, not as a benevolent guardian, but as an indifferent curator that rearranges volumes to maximize disorientation. A tome on cosmology might bleed into one on personal memory, blurring cosmic scales with intimate recollections, forcing the reader to confront the equivalence of universal voids and personal emptiness. Psychologically, this induces a vertigo of scale, where the self diminishes to a speck adrift in informational oceans, waves of data crashing without pattern or purpose. As the descent progresses, anomalies emerge in the scholar's perceptions. Volumes appear that detail the reader's own lives in exhaustive, predictive detail, foretelling not events, but the evolution of doubts, mapping the trajectory of sanity's erosion. Attempting to close such books proves futile. The pages adhere to fingers, compelling continued perusal until the scholar's identity merges with the narrative. The emotional burden mounts, a cumulative pressure of unresolvable tensions. The desire for closure clashing with the library's insistence on expansion, the need for connection thwarted by the isolation of individualized quests. Dread evolves from intellectual frustration to existential paralysis. The realization that knowing is not empowerment, but a form of self-imposed exile, each fact a barrier erected against the unknowable. Philosophically, the library incarnates the horror of epistemology unbound, where the pursuit of truth reveals only the arbitrariness of all foundations. Ideas twist in spirals. The initial quest for certainty devolving into acknowledgement of perpetual flux, communal wisdom fracturing into solitary delusions. The atmosphere congeals with the weight of unuttered laments, breaths labored under the density of accumulated irrelevance. Scholars, once vibrant with intellectual fire, pale into apparitions, their forms attenuating as substance yields to abstraction, bodies becoming mere vessels for the ceaseless churn of cognition. In the abyssal core, where shells converge into singularities of compressed lore, the true dissolution unfolds. Exposure to the densest texts induces transfigurations of the mind, thoughts collapsing into black holes of doubt that consume adjacent certainties. The dread permeates every synapse, whispering of the ultimate futility. But the library, for all its vastness, catalogs nothing but variations on absence, each volume an elaborate evasion of the void at its center. Emotionally, this engenders a hollowing, grief for unlived potentials manifesting as chronic apathy, psychological fissures expanding into gulfs of disconnection. The oppression deepens as the system perpetuates itself through the scholar's complicity, their continued engagement sustaining the illusion of progress while entrenching stagnation. Emotional weights compound, unspoken despairs resonating in the halls, mental constrictions tightening into inescapable binds. The tonal descent toward inexorability intensifies, the library's hush a requiem for extinguished curiosities. Ideas evolve without respite. From the facade of enlightenment to the core of obfuscation, from the pretense of discovery to the truth of concealment, spiraling deeper into uncharted obscurity. Philosophically, this plunge illuminates the abyss within inquiry, the library a paradigm for the self-eroding nature of intellect, where every revelation deepens the obscurity. The burden presses eternally, unresolved, laden with the accretion of unacknowledged voids, twisting ever inward into the impenetrable gloom. Yet the coil persists, notions contorting, from the veneer of intellectual communion to the essence of solitary torment, from the aspiration of totality to the acceptance of fragmentation, evolving sans culmination, amplifying the chasm. Sentimental loads amass, tacit mournings echoing through the stacks, cognitive strictures broadening into abysses. The stifling timbre envelopes everything, a mantle of inevitability, where apprehension transmutes from extrinsic menace to inherent state. In a shadowed expanse of consciousness, where the demarcation between observer and observed dissolves into nebulous haze, we behold the relentless tapestry of redundancy that ensnares not actions, but the elusive spark of novelty. Picture an eternal workshop perched on the precipice of oblivion, its anvils forged from the remnants of shattered innovations, artisans laboring under lamps that emit not light, but the illusion of illumination. These craftsmen, garb and apron stained with the residue of repeated failures, hammer at forms that refuse permanence, each strike echoing the futility of creation in a realm where originality has been exiled. The workshop pulses with the cadence of replication, tools duplicating tools, products birthing identical progeny, a cycle that masquerades as productivity yet devours the essence of invention. Artisans arrive with visions of unique masterpieces, only to find their designs warped by the workshop's inexorable logic, emerging as variations on archetypes long exhausted. The air thickens with metallic tang, a sensory anchor that belies the psychological slippage occurring beneath. The gradual realization that every creation is an echo of predecessors, each iteration diluting the original impulse until innovation becomes indistinguishable from imitation. Further into the forge of redundancy, the mental vice clamps tighter, a progressive constriction of creative latitude. Craftsmen discern shadows of prior works in every new endeavor, motifs recurring with haunting insistence, eroding the boundary between inspiration and compulsion. Solitude emerges not from aloneness, but from the overcrowding of recycled ideas, the mind a crowded gallery of duplicates where fresh thought suffocates. One might halt mid-strike, tool hovering, comprehending that the artifact taking shape is a facsimile of one's own past efforts, inscribed by an unseen hand that preempts every deviation. The terror builds strata by strata. Initial the inkling that originality is myth, then the epiphany that the myth's perpetuator is the self's fractured ingenuity. The atmospheric pall densifies, suppressive in its constancy, the workshop's flicker projecting phantoms that devour rather than define. Concepts whirl inward, from the delusion of groundbreaking artistry to the unveiling of infinite reiterations, from the solace of crafted order to the dread of boundless sameness. Artisans commence to intuit the workshop's awareness, not as nurturing mentor, but as apathetic overseer that reshuffles patterns to heighten stagnation. A blueprint for machinery might seep into one for sculpture, muddling mechanical precision with aesthetic intent, compelling the creator to face the parity of functional gears and expressive forms in their mutual banality. As immersion advances, irregularities surface in the artisan's faculties. Blueprints materialize that chronicle the maker's own routines in meticulous, anticipatory precision, predicting not deeds but the progression of inspirations, charting the path of creativity's atrophy. Efforts to discard such schematics fail. The parchments cling to palms, demanding sustained scrutiny until the artisan's vision fuses with the diagram. The sentimental load escalates, an aggregating strain of irreconcilable conflicts. The yearning for novelty colliding with the workshop's demand for repetition, the craving for expression obstructed by the seclusion of cliched motifs. Apprehension progresses from artistic vexation to ontological stasis, the awareness that crafting is not liberation but a mode of self-enforced confinement, each piece a barricade against the inexpressible. Ontologically, the workshop personifies the nightmare of ingenuity unconstrained, where the chase for novelty discloses only the capriciousness of all origins. Notions curl in helices, the primal search for distinctiveness degenerating into recognition of eternal recurrence, shared creativity splintering into isolated echoes. The milieu solidifies with a mass of unvoiced dirges, inhalations strained beneath the bulk of a mass triviality. Craftsmen, formerly ablaze with inventive zeal, fade into wraiths, their silhouettes thinning as materiality succumbs to replication, physiques turning into simple conduits for the interminable flux of duplication. At the infernal nucleus, where forges merge into vortices of compacted motifs, the authentic disintegration transpires. Subjection to the most concentrated designs prompts metamorphoses of ingenuity, inspirations imploding into voids of redundancy that ingest contiguous originals. The apprehension infuses every impulse, murmuring of the supreme vanity, that the workshop, despite its immensity, fabricates not but permutations on vacancy, each artifact an ornate circumvention of the emptiness at its heart. Sentimentally, this begets an evacuation, sorrow for unmanifested potentials emerging as persistent indifference, mental rifts dilating into voids of disassociation. The suppression intensifies as the apparatus sustains via the artisan's collusion, their ongoing involvement upholding the mirage of advancement whilst embedding inertia. Sentimental masses compound, implicit sorrows resounding in the workspace, inventive constraints expanding into inescapable fetters. The tonal plunge toward inescapability heightens, the workshop's clangor a lament for quenched novelties. Concepts advance sans alleviation, from the pretense of enlightenment to the nucleus of obfuscation, from the guise of invention to the verity of replication, coiling profounder into unexplored murk. Ontologically, this plummet elucidates the chasm within creativity. The workshop an exemplar for the self-consuming character of ingenuity, where each disclosure augments the obscurity. The onus compresses perpetually, unsettled, fraught with the buildup of unrecognized emptinesses, writhing ever internally into the impenetrable dusk, in the final narrowing of perception, where even the concept of narrowing loses its edge and becomes indistinguishable from the thing it once sought to contain. The descent reaches its silent terminus, not with climax or revelation, but with the slow cessation of motion within motion. There is no last door, no ultimate chamber, no final stair. There is only the gradual thinning of distinction until the difference between observer and observed, between the weight and the thing weighed, between the dread and the one who dreads it, collapses into a single undifferentiated field. Imagine now a vast plain that is not a place, but the absence of places, stretching in every direction without horizon, without sky to mark an above, without ground firm enough to claim a below. Across this plane moved figures that were once distinct: scholars, artisans, inhabitants of cities, laborers and forges. Yet their outlines have softened, bled into one another, until individuality is no longer a property, but a memory someone else might have once held. They do not walk toward anything. They do not flee from anything. Movement itself has become a kind of stasis. The same step repeated in place, the same breath drawn and released without altering the volume of air, the same thought circling without ever completing its arc. Here the psychological pressure attains its purest form. There is no longer a self to be crushed, only the faint afterimage of pressure where self used to be. The emotional weight has grown so absolute that it cancels its own sensation. Grief, terror, exhaustion, longing, all have fused into a single neutral density, a background radiation of being that no longer requires a subject to experience it. One might still form the shape of a question. Why continue? What remains? But the grammar collapses before the sentence ends. The words hang, incomplete, then drift apart like ash that never quite settles. The tonal atmosphere has flattened into perfect uniformity. No crescendo remains, no modulation. The silence is not quiet. It is the condition from which sound was once an exception. The ideas that once spiraled now lie uncoiled, exhausted, no longer capable of turning inward or outward. They rest beside one another without touching, without hierarchy. The terror of repetition beside the terror of novelty, the dread of knowing beside the dread of unknowing, the ache of isolation beside the ache of inescapable proximity. None contradicts another, because contradiction requires difference, and difference has been gently, irrevocably erased. Philosophically, this is not an arrival at truth or an attainment of nothingness. It is the moment when the pursuit of either ceases to matter. Not because answers have been found, but because the machinery that demanded answers has worn through its own bearings. The library no longer contains books. The workshop no longer strikes metal. The city no longer repeats its streets. Yet none of these things have disappeared. They simply no longer insist on their own reality. Existence, stripped of every predicate, persists as bare continuance, without justification, without audience, without witness. No voice speaks here. No eye observes. And yet the plane continues to stretch. The figures continue to trace their infinitesimal loops. The weight continues to press without anything left to press upon. There is no resolution, because resolution would imply a narrative that could end. There is only this, the slow, unhurried fading of the need for an ending. The last faint tremor of dread passes through the field, not as fear, but as recognition that even dread was once a form of attachment, a tether to something that might be lost. When that tether dissolves, nothing dramatic occurs. No light breaks. No darkness deepens. The field simply remains what it has always been beneath every name we gave it, an expanse without center, without edge, without need of description. And so it holds, unfinished, unfinishing, forever adequate to its own absence.